Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you enjoy this video. I am always on the lookout for new dip recipes because I'm kind of obsessed with tortilla chips. It's a real problem, and I have high cholesterol, so I can't have too much dairy. So my favorite would be cheese dip or guacamole. I don't have the money to buy guacamole all the time. And cheese dip, I don't have the arteries to eat cheese dip all the time. So I was looking for a cheese-ish recipe for dip, and I came across a butternut squash dip recipe from rachelcooks.com. Her recipe isn't vegan because it uses 8 ounces of real cheese. She has Monterey Jack in her recipe. But if you substitute vegan cheese, it would be vegan. So I decided to try that. I have made chickpea cheese dip, chickpea vegan cheese dip in the past, but my husband pointed out, and I kind of agree with him, that um, the chickpea based dips tend to just taste like hummus. And we already have hummus in the house all the time, but I don't really like it that much with chips. I don't know why. I'd rather have something with a bit more pow. Like the hummus we make isn't all that. It's spicy, but it's not all that flavorful otherwise. So we were going to get a bag of butternut squash at the grocery store. There was one bag left, and it was 10 ounces. The recipe calls for 12 ounces. I don't know where you find a 12-ounce bag of butternut squash. So then my husband said, "Why don't you just buy a butternut squash?" I've never laid eyes on a butternut squash. It's my first time touching a butternut squash. So I was a little intimidated, but then I thought, well, I when I made the chicken squash zucchini dish, the carb-free one, that involved a squash I'd never looked at before. It was spaghetti squash that my friend gave me. So I said, let me just see. It can't be any harder than using spaghetti squash, and it's not. But it was kind of a pain to peel it. As you can see, it took me a really long time to peel it, and then you have to cube it and bake it. So I just looked up online. I want to say it was like 425 or something to bake it for a certain number of minutes. Probably 20 is what I put. You'll see soon here. So once I baked the squash, I was able to use it as if it were frozen squash. The other thing I did for this was I used half a squash for this recipe because I had another recipe that I was going to use butternut squash for, although I believe that one only calls for 1 cup, which is about half a bag. So I think my original intention was to use half a bag for this recipe and kind of make it a smaller quantity, but that probably didn't end up happening. So I'm using real fresh butternut squash, and it was definitely cheaper than the frozen. So if you've got the time and you have a sharp enough knife and you're strong enough, because it wasn't as easy as cutting and peeling carrots or zucchini was, then yeah, go ahead and get the fresh stuff. It's not gonna make that much of a difference. So here's the squash before it goes into the oven. I am looking up my internet history now, and I see that I did it 400 degrees for 20, let's see here, 25 minutes. The recipe that I found online did say to put toss oil on it, but I didn't want to compromise the consistency of the dip, so I just threw it in there raw. And now I'm testing to see if it's cooked all the way. So as long as a fork goes in there pretty easily and it comes off pretty easily, then it's cooked. So I'm going to let that cool, and then I'll use half of that for this recipe. Now we're going to dice up the equivalent of 1 clove of garlic. The recipe also calls for using a teaspoon of olive oil in the pan when you cook the garlic. I apparently forgot that. And a half cup of finely diced red onion. I didn't have any onion at the time, so I'm going to use onion powder. I also don't really like uncooked onion. So if a recipe calls for onion and it doesn't involve a lot of cooking time, then I will just not put it in there. Like a lot of, I guess, traditional Mexican tacos, for example, no cheese, raw onions. I can't have the raw onions. It's not going to work out. So I just tell them to take that off. And oh my gosh, they include cilantro usually too. And I'm like, no, no cilantro. It tastes like soap. So I have to have like a tiny amount of cilantro. Otherwise, it tastes like soap. So it doesn't look like I sprayed the pan with any oil at this point, but I definitely should have. I don't know if I was misreading the recipe. A lot of times when I make substitutions, I will misread a recipe, especially when I'm filming because I have a lot on my mind. So at this point, you would want to put some kind of nonstick spray in the pan, cook your onion and your garlic. If you're using frozen butternut squash, you can go ahead and steam it in the microwave for whatever the package says, and then add that to the skillet once the onions have gotten translucent and cooked enough. Then add a half teaspoon of cumin and a half teaspoon of chili powder if you have it. I added cayenne later on in the recipe because I did not have chili powder. And the original recipe from this website technically is a recipe for a vegan salsa con queso because she wants you to add a can of diced tomatoes. Looks like not drained, just with the water and everything. Diced tomatoes mixed with green chilies, which I have seen at the store. It's very good. But I had special plans for my diced tomato can, so I decided not to do that and just make this cheese, a cheese recipe. And it was not working so great on the stove, mainly because there was no liquid to really break down the squash. So at this point, I am winging it, and the rest of the recipe is completely my own creation because I made too many substitutions and it was not working out. So I'm going to try to blend this in our food processor. As you can see here, I'm not getting very far. The top of the food, the top of it's not getting blended. And I don't know if that's because it's too dry or if it's because our blades are getting dull. I should have used our Vitamix at this point because the Vitamix will pulverize and liquefy pretty much anything. I did want to add jalapeno pepper juice because what I'm really trying to make is a copycat recipe of the Fritos jalapeno cheddar dip, which is the best dip in the world, and I will have to maybe forget about my cholesterol and get some soon because I haven't had it in a long time. It's really great, and so I wanted to add the jalapenos to that, and that just has jalapeno juice in it. So I'm still having trouble with mixing it, so I'm adding some milk. This is going to be a third of a cup once I pour the whole thing in. You can keep this vegan by using coconut milk, and I do recommend that if you're not going to add the tomatoes. There's really no other way to get this to become a liquid. So I should have cleaned off the bottom of that pot, whatever that is called, because there's, burned like garlic on the bottom of it, and it kind of scraped into the food I was making. Which is great because I didn't serve this to anybody besides myself, and I didn't mind the burnt pieces in there. Now I'm adding an extra half a cup of milk. I did add that full third cup earlier, but I cut out part of the scene, the second batch, when I tried blending it. So what you want to do at this point, if you're following me, or if you're using the tomato stuff instead, is to just let this boil. Let it break down enough so that it boils. Let the butternut squash smush up so that you can't taste any solid pieces, and that will help get the consistency that you want for this. Bring to a boil at medium-high heat and then reduce to a simmer, and then add your mozzarella, your cheese. Cheddar would have been a better option for this, but I didn't have any. I'm adding half a cup. The original recipe calls for 8 ounces, but I had plans for the rest of that cheese, actually using the rest of that butternut squash as well. That is one way you can save money on your groceries. Just use a little bit of a less quantity than what the recipe calls for, especially if it's something that's not spices. For the most part, things with a mild flavor won't change your recipe that much if you lower the quantity of it, which I do a lot for cheese. So the dip is sort of done. I'm going to test it. The consistency is perfect. It's exactly the way you want cheese dip to look. The color is perfect. But it doesn't really taste like cheese dip yet. There's no salt and pepper in this recipe, unless you count chili powder. So I'm adding salt, I'm adding cayenne. I feel like every recipe, if it doesn't include salt and it's not sweet food, you need to put it in there. Go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, please. It really helps my channel reach more viewers, and it lets me know what you'd like to see. So after adding the extra spices, I'm going to taste some more butternut squash dip. That wasn't great either, so we're bringing out the big guns. I'm not sure. If you're vegan, you probably don't eat this, but there is a nacho flavor popcorn seasoning that is made with real cheese stuff, although the cholesterol is fairly low on it. So I'm going to add that and see if that helps at all. And it's not so great. And then I remembered nutritional yeast is in a lot of the chickpea cheese dip recipes. So I have about 2 tablespoons, I believe, left over from this bag. So I'm going to add the whole thing in and see if that helps. Nutritional yeast is a really interesting food. I'm not really sure what it's used for aside from making vegan things taste not vegan. Someone's got to tell me, what was this originally for? What do people do with this? So it can have a chickeny flavor, it can have a cheesy flavor, and I added that to the dip since it was in chickpea flour or chickpea dip recipes, and it definitely helped. It's not the best recipe. I'm not going to make this again, but it was good, and I actually finished it in like 2 days, so what do I know? Maybe it was better than I thought. Thank you guys, and if you have any cheese recipes you want to share, especially if they're vegan or low cholesterol, I would be happy to try them and happy to test them out for you and do a video on that. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful day.